so that we can share it with those who aren't able to join us. And I'm going to hand it over to Bradford.
Maybe ask everyone to put their.
Okay, hello everybody. This is Bradford Rooney here. Thanks, Corinne, and the staff at PEI for having us today and organizing this. It's a pleasure to be able to bring you this information session on our winter visitor segments. I'm relatively new to Tours and PEI. I joined on September 1st, and so it's nice to get a chance to get some FaceTime with some of you people in industry, and be great if we could be together today, but obviously in the current climate, it's great to have these type of avenues so that we can still connect. So I will be sharing a presentation today and going over, again, those 2020, 2021 winter visitor segments. I thought I'd give a chance to put a face to the name, and so I certainly look forward to working with some or all of you in the future. If anybody is on video, it might be best to, you can turn that video off just so we'll keep some bandwidth here, and hopefully everything runs smooth in that sense. Keith Hansen is with me off camera in the room. He'll be available on chat, so if folks have questions, he'll be there to either relay those or address them, so that'll kind of be how we interact. And I'm just going to get my screen shared here. You just bear with me for a moment. So, and if anybody has if there's any issues with volume or connection or anything, or if you have any concerns, that chat is the place to go. You see my screen okay? Okay, great. So, so yeah, again, it's great to be here. So this session is a little bit of a data-driven information piece where I'll be going over our winter visitor segments that we released last week. For those of you who were present at last Wednesday's strategy release for the winter, Keith Hansen had gone over the visitor segments briefly, and we released those. Those are available online. For those of you that got a chance to look at those segments, those 2-pagers, that's fantastic. If you haven't seen them yet, that's okay. This session serves to introduce them, and we're going to go over some high-level stuff for each of them, and I'll show everybody where to get those. So as far as an agenda is concerned for this presentation, I first want to just step back and kind of talk a little bit about what our goal is with this segmentation exercise. I want to talk about what Environics Envision is, that company, as well as their PRISM classification system, which sort of drives this particular segmentation process. And so once I've covered a bit of that background, I want to talk a little bit about the data themes and the information that we use to build these segments, and give a little bit of a context to how we directed that information. And then finally, the back half of this presentation will be to introduce our 4 winter segments and to go over each of them in a little bit of detail, so we can get a sense of, what differentiates these segments, what's similar between them, and see what we can pull from that. So, okay, so as far as segmentation, this is really a marketing process, and what it is it's the process of grouping customers, or in our case, visitors. If I say customers today, we're really, given that we're in the nature of tourism, really talking about visitors to PEI. So it's that process of grouping visitors into cohorts or segments based on shared traits. So based on groups of like people or like visitors. And so the question that we try to address when doing a segmentation exercise like this is essentially, how can we take an evidence-based approach to identify our visitors, to locate our visitors, and to describe those target visitors. So Environics Envision. So Environics is a company, and it's a name you may have heard recently or in the past. So Environics Analytics, they're a data analytics and marketing company. Tourism PEI has worked with Environics in the past on some similar type of segmentation work and some other marketing exercises. And Envision is a tool that Environics has developed that allows licensed users to do their own custom segmentation. So we have a license for Envision, and that's how we were able to do these custom segments ourselves. And what Envision does is it allows the user to integrate their own organizational data, so in our case, our visitor data, with some databases around demographics and consumer lifestyle that we also have licensed. So Envision allows us to integrate our own data with those databases to do those three things: to identify our visitors, to locate, and to describe them. Now, the PRISM classification system is sort of the glue that makes this whole process work and holds everything together. So PRISM is what Envision and Environics use. And what it is PRISM is a classification system that basically groups all Canadians into 67 different profiles or neighborhoods that can be thought of. So, and this is all driven by postal code. So essentially what they've done is they've used an incredible amount of data from extensive databases to basically group Canadians into these 67 profiles based on some shared demographics. So they take into account things like age and family structure and basically what point of the life stage people are in, takes into account social values, shared personality traits, consumer behavior. And so we could think of these 67 profiles as neighborhoods, and it's sort of this concept of birds of a feather flock together. So in any given postal code in Canada has been assigned to one of these 67 groups. So this is sort of the process laid out in a kind of easy to visualize way. So I mentioned those PRISM profiles, which are based on postal codes, kind of being the glue that holds this together. So the first step of the segmentation process is for us to identify who the target visitors are. And we do that by taking our own primary research or our own data that we have on visitors and tying them to PRISM profiles and basically determining which ones stand out as our best visitors to target. The second part of the process is to then take those visitors, which are assigned to PRISM profiles, and group them into custom segments. And then we can also describe them, and that's done using these external databases that we've licensed. So again, things like lifestyle, demographic, social values, etc. And it's important to note that when doing a custom segment exercise, there's a few different ways you can approach it. And the way I look at it that is whether you want to do broad targeting. So that would be, in our case, like who is the general visitor to Prince Edward Island, or you can get a little more specific and look at product-focused or season-focused segmenting. And so, of course, today we're talking about winter visitor segments. So we've very much taken a season-focused approach. So essentially, the marketing goal determines the segmentation process, and it specifically determines the type of data that you're going to use to discover and identify the visitors. Okay, so given that, then we then have to think about, well, what is the context of our current exercise? So with these segments, we have a few context pieces that are worth overviewing. So first off, we are interested in the winter season, so that off season and part of the shoulder seasons. We are looking at a leisure market. So for this exercise, we're not interested, say, in business travel. For this particular segmentation, we're looking at the winter leisure market. We have, of course, are in the middle of this COVID pandemic, and so there is COVID-related behavior that needs to be considered, particularly around things like comfort to travel at this current time, given that we're talking about the coming season over, the next from here till the spring. And we of course have some geographical considerations and some boundaries given this pandemic. So we're very much looking at in all likelihood, what we would think would be an Atlantic bubble for this coming winter season. I'm aware, that is suspended at the moment, but once it is safe to travel, it's reasonable to think that we would be looking within the context of an Atlantic bubble. And so some of the themes that we would use to identify who our target visitors are, given those contexts, and also group them, are things like demographics. So, you know, what life stage folks are in, what their family structure is. We have past visitation and likeliness to visit. So this is what I would call strength of travel, and this is a big part of identifying who those target visitors are going to be before we group them. Urbanity, you know, whether people are located more rurally or in urban settings. Seasonality of the trip, of course, we're interested in winter travel, so tendency to travel in the winter becomes a variable of interest. And income, of course, is a helpful way to group, in particular, visitors into segments. Okay, so those are some of the themes. So the first half of that process, so identifying the visitor using our own organizational data. So there's two main data sources that we use to build these segments. The first is our exit surveys. So the PEI exit surveys are comprehensive surveys that Tourism PEI undertakes on a periodic basis. I've included the last three. So we have 2012, 2014, and the most recent 2018 exit surveys. And from there, we get a fairly robust sample size in terms of looking at off-island overnight visitors, and we of course can filter that down into leisure visitors, again given the context that we're interested in for this exercise. We can get things like repeat visitors, so those folks that aren't first-time visitors and have a higher frequency of travel to PEI. And we can look at what season they visited PEI in to get a sense of who may be stronger for off-season visit. The second data source that we included here is from Destination Canada. It's their Global Tourism Watch Special COVID Survey. So this is a survey of Canadians that has been ongoing in different waves since the pandemic began. And what it does is it captures a number of travel-related behaviors for Canadians in light of this pandemic. So the main one we're interested in is the comfort to travel in the coming periods. So if somebody is, you know, strong for travel and exhibits all the hallmarks for who we might expect to be a visitor, it's important to then overlay what their comfort to travel would be in the next, 6-month time period, which would be relevant for this coming winter. So once we've done that and can then figure out which PRISM profiles rank strongly in terms of being target visitors, we then want to group them using those databases I'd mentioned before. And so we're talking about demographic and behavioral data. We're really talking about where do individuals live, what's their family structure, what's their age, affluency, what are their preferences, what kind of activities do they like, what are their lifestyle tendencies, what is their media use and consumption. And so when we talk about these variables and we can basically assign values, which you would see on those 2-page segmentation personifications that we've released and that we'll be going over, it's important to understand that how we describe those variables is very much in the context of our focus geography or our target market. And so that geography that we've selected to do this segmentation exercise is the Maritime provinces. So I mentioned already that we would be reasonable to look within the context of an Atlantic bubble. We have not included Newfoundland in our target population, simply because our proportion of visitors from Newfoundland, given their population, is quite small compared to New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. So we decided to just use the Maritime provinces. The nice thing and the flexibility that we have using this Envision tool and the way we've done our segmentation is if we have our 4 winter visitor segments, if we decided for one reason or another to include Newfoundland or say another province, if borders were to open, then we can easily target those, because as I mentioned, those PRISM profiles are found all across Canada and it's all based on postal code. So it allows us to do location beyond our initial target market. So that's kind of nice. So yes, we're looking at the Maritime provinces. That's a population of just shy of 1.9 million. And again, as I mentioned on the previous slide, when we start to get into some of that, some of the content on those personifications, those 2-page documents, we remember that it's in the context of the average Maritimer, which is our benchmark geography. Okay, so just about to the point here where I'd like to get into those 4 segments, introduce them and go over them. I thought I would just mention a few considerations. So these segmentation personifications, it's a pretty powerful process that gives us some great insight into who our likely visitors are and what they're all about. But it's important to remember that it's just one kind of tool in that marketing toolbox that we have. As I mentioned, we segment and describe the groups based on postal codes in these neighborhoods, and it's all, you know, it all uses statistical probabilities. So it's an evidence-based approach, but we also know that obviously not every single individual within a postal code or a neighborhood are going to be the same, are going to behave the same. I'm in a COA 108 postal code, and me and my neighbors aren't necessarily exactly alike, but it certainly gives us an idea of what the trends are and what some probabilities are in terms of behavior. So something to keep in mind. Okay, just gonna grab a quick drink of water here. So these are the 4 groups. Again, those that got the presentation Wednesday or had a chance to get online and have a look at the personifications will be familiar with these names. So we have active families, we have old-fashioned fun, urban empty nesters, and young and social. And those graphics and small names underneath, those are the prism profiles that went into that we grouped to make these 4 custom segments. So when we talk about urban empty nesters or active families, again, in our benchmark of the Maritime Provinces, these are very much custom segments. So before we get into each one, maybe a bit of a high-level segment overview in terms of the demographics. So active families, we are looking at a population in the Maritimes of about 165, just shy of 166,000. They are in a life stage. These are families, mostly middle-aged families with a range of children ages, generally found in suburban areas with an average household income just shy of 100,000, again, in the Maritimes, and they have a mix of job types, so not one kind of defined area for the workforce. Our urban empty nesters are very similar target size in terms of household population. They're 160, just shy of 167,000. And these are older singles and couples, as the name would suggest, with empty nesters. Their children mostly have moved out if they have children. Mostly located in urban areas, average household income of 86,000 and change. And a lot of them are retired, those still in the workforce, generally in white collar. Old-fashioned fun, they're our largest group at 373 and change thousand in the Maritimes. They're older couples and families, so they're a mix of families and empty nesters. These are our rural group, so these ones are definitely found in more rural areas. Average household income 90,000, more blue collar service sector for employment. And finally, young and social, they're our smallest group for sure. They're 58,000 in terms of population. These are younger singles and couples we are talking about adults, but younger single and couple adults found in mostly urban areas and a 71,000 average household income. And they are a mix of white collar and service sector mostly. Okay, so actually I'll quickly go over how that population stacks for all of the Maritimes. So again, I mentioned we're just shy of 1.9 million in terms of household population in the Maritimes. Our young and social, which is our smallest group there, they represent about 3% of Maritimers. Old-fashioned fun, 20%. The other 2 groups, just shy of 9% each. So in total, we're targeting about 40% of the maritime population. And the other 60% would be considered non-target. Not to say that visitors won't come from those other populations, but excuse me, in terms of our focus and our target segments, we're looking at about 40%. Okay, so as I mentioned, we released these personifications on each of the segments last week. So there are 2-page documents that look a little like this. They can be found online. Okay, so on our website, you can navigate through our Department of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture, but the quickest way certainly would be the link you see on the screen. So it's princeedwardisland.ca/tourism research. Yeah, Keith, if it sounds like he already has put that into the chat, so you can bookmark that. And so each of our 4 winter segments, along with the supporting documents, can be found there. Look at what the page looks like there below. I also want to mention that this page is for research publications, so we have published some other research documents there, and we're going to use that as a place where folks can access final reports from our own primary research, as well as some partner research. There's some Destination Canada stuff on there as well, so that may be a useful bookmark for folks if they want to keep up with current research. I also want to mention, with the visitor segments section on that website, there is a how-to document. It's a 3-pager. It's very useful for interpreting these 2-page personifications. There's a lot of figures and data in those, and so I'll be going over a bit of that interpretation and kind of how to read these today. But when you get back and get looking at them, this is a handy thing, handy reference to have, say, at your side to go back if you're wondering about a certain table or whatnot. Okay, so first group I'm going to dive into is our old-fashioned fun. So our old-fashioned fun, they're a down-to-earth sort of traditional maritime rural family. So these are very much our rural folks. Some of them are families, they're a little older, so so if the children are still in the household, they'll be kind of a little bit on the older end, towards maybe teenage years plus. And then some of them are empty nesters at this point. They tend to be traditional folks with very traditional hobbies. They like to spend time outdoors and in nature. Gardening is big, you know, taking care of their property, doing tinkering with projects around the home. They're active in their communities. They like to take in local events and entertainment. And with respect to leisure travel and particularly in the winter, they will be interested in some outdoor product offering in terms of being in the mix. So as far as their market size, there's 373,000 and change in the Maritimes, representing just shy of 152,000 households. So that's, you know, 19.7, just shy of 20% of the Maritimes. Now, this next table, a geographic distribution, this is on the first page of the 2-page reports. And this first group, I'm going to go through how to interpret this table because there's a little bit going on here. So in the first column on the left under census subdivisions, so these are the census subdivisions or areas in the Maritime ranked kind of from the top down as to where we can find this particular segment. So I'm going to go across the columns and sort of explain what they mean. And I'm going to use the second entry there, Lunenburg, Nova Scotia. I'm going to use that census subdivision as an example. Okay, so the next column in under target group is percent of group. So that 4.3 for Lunenburg, that means 4.3% of our old-fashioned fun folks live in Lunenburg. Okay, and that's how this table is organized from the top. This is giving us the top 10, I guess. The next column in, percent of CS, which stands for census subdivision, that means that 58.3% of residents of Lunenburg, or households in Lunenburg, belong to old-fashioned fun. So when you think of that, more than 1 in 2 households in Lunenburg fall in this target group. That means there's, you know, they're there in some density for sure. The index value, so the indexes are important. They're tied to a lot of the values that we report on these 2-pagers. The indexes are typically found in brackets, but in these tables they're just listed in a column. And the indexes are sometimes colored blue, sometimes the font is black, and sometimes it's red. So what the index means is it means whether or not this particular segment is underrepresented, equally represented, or overrepresented in any particular category when compared to the average Maritimer. So when you see an index value of 100, that means they are exactly equally represented when you look at all Maritimers. So they're as equally likely as any other Maritimer to exhibit that particular trait or behavior, or in this case, living in a certain area. When the number's red, that means they're more than 10%, so they're a value of at least 110 or higher. And when it's blue, it's a value of at least below 90, and blue meaning underrepresented, red meaning overrepresented. So in this case, old-fashioned fun have an index in Lunenburg of 314. That means they're more than 3 times likely to have a household in Lunenburg that's old-fashioned fun than any other household in the Maritimes. So that essentially how we can interpret that is old-fashioned fun is found in much more represented in Lunenburg. So that would be an area that you're most likely to find old-fashioned fun. Whereas we look above at Halifax, there's a lot of old-fashioned fun in Halifax. We see they're 15% of that group, but it's such a large market that they're underrepresented. So you're less likely to find a resident that's old-fashioned fun in Halifax. On the right side under market, that just gives us some information about Lunenburg. So there's 11,000, a little over 11,000 households in Lunenburg, which is 1.4% of the maritime market. Generally speaking, with old-fashioned fun, in terms of geography, we can see that there's a few areas with high red indexes where they're found in a lot of density. Generally, we're seeing some more rural type areas. Of course, Halifax is #1, but that census subdivision does include some, Dartmouth and out into some of the rural areas under that census subdivision. And then as we go down lower, we're seeing kind of less populated areas and some pretty strong index values. So there's some rural areas where they're found in abundance. Okay, so as far as previous travel in Prince Edward Island, so this would come from our exit surveys. Our old-fashioned fun, there's certainly strong repeat visitors. Over 97% of them have been to PEI more than once. Their average length of stay is a little below average. It's 3.6 nights on average. A fairly healthy spend at $883 per party per trip. And they have some strong ties. You'll see in all our groups, there's a theme of ties in terms of having friends and family in PEI and them having identified that being at least part of their previous trips. So just under 47% have friends and family in PEI. Okay, as far as some activities that are relevant in terms of tourism and winter tourism activities, we're definitely seeing some outdoor activities pop up here between hiking, backpacking, visiting parks. We have cross-country skiing and snowshoeing showing up, as well as ATV and snowmobiling. This is the only group that snowmobiling made it into the kind of key winter tourism activities. So in terms of reading this section, the number that has a percent, that's the percent of folks in old-fashioned fun that have identified this as an activity they participate in. The number in brackets, again, when you see brackets, that's index values. So that tells us whether they're above or below average for the Maritimers, with 100 being exactly average. So cross-country skiing, ATV, and snowmobiling are two areas that they overperform in or over participate in. So there will be some outdoor activities that will be a draw for this group. As far as accommodations go, this group is fairly balanced across, a little overrepresented in terms of hotels as a preference at 54%. We're seeing package tours there show up in a strong red index, so they're more likely to use package tours in terms of accommodations. Something to keep in mind there, however, is that category would include things such as bus tours or cruises or all-inclusive vacations. So this is in the context of leisure travel and vacation travel in general. And this is, of course, information from before COVID. It would be, spanning the last 3 years. This comes from our Numeris Optics consumer database. So a mix of accommodations, hotels standing out a little bit, standalone vacation rentals at 19% is on par with the average. So, and of course, those with strong ties, especially relatives, they may opt to stay with them. Okay, and restaurant types. This is kind of the final one I want to go over for each group. But this also, first time seeing this table, take a second to explain what we're looking at here, folks. So in terms of the table that we're seeing 3 different columns, there's the orange column, the blue column, and the green column. Those represent different frequencies at which this group or any group use those different restaurant types that are listed along the left. So that orange column is more frequently, it's once a month or more. The blue column in the middle, that's a little less frequent than once a month. It's 2 to 11 times a year. and on the far right in the green is less frequently. It's once a year. So if we look across those three frequencies, we see some themes with this particular group. They're going to be more interested in more comfort food, more familiar atmospheres, and nothing too terribly serious. Casual family dining, pub restaurants, the occasional sports bar. This is a group that's very much, they're traditional. They're going to like things that are familiar. So familiarity, comfort food, I'd expect to see on during a leisure vacation trip, a tendency towards pubs or menus that are familiar. Okay, so on to the next group, active families. So this is very much of our four segments. This is our families. These are the families that are going to be traveling with their kids. Their kids are going to be a mix of age, probably amongst our four groups, certainly with the youngest kids. And again, we'll be traveling in that family unit, and that family unit's going to dictate a lot of their what their itinerary is going to look like. These folks tend to live in suburb areas, and they lead that busy, always on the go family life. Kids in school, parents working, juggling extracurricular activities, running to hockey games or whatnot. So very busy life. And while they may look at an excursion to PEI as a getaway from that busy life, given that the kids are with them, they'll have a fairly busy itinerary compared to perhaps other groups. And there's going to be a strong interest in outdoor activities, and that product mix is going to be driven by things that are suitable for the family. Very similar, not similar. This population, they're about 9%. There's 165, just about 166,000 residents in the Maritimes that would fall under active families, this target group, just shy of 63,000 households. And when we look at their geographic distribution, one thing that kind of pops out is all of that red you see under the indexes. That means this segment is found kind of spread out across less census subdivisions. So therefore, the density is a little higher, and that's what's driving those higher indexes. And as I mentioned, that they tend to be living in suburbs. We do see, areas like Riverview, Quispamsis, Rothsay, of course, Halifax at the top there. That does include Dartmouth and other surrounding towns. That's quite a large subdivision. And as we can see under Halifax too, that's 38% of all active family households are in Halifax. So quite a congregation. Of course, that is a large market when you think of households and population in the Maritime. Halifax has got a lot of people. So in terms of targeting, we've got a fairly strong list in terms of indexes there, with Halifax 38% of the group. That's quite substantial. As far as previous travel to PEI, they're also strong repeat visitors, just shy of 97%, which is just about average. They have an average length of stay of 3.6 nights. Tend to spend, on average, I guess, $871 and change, and do also have some ties in terms of friends and family in PEI. And certainly when there is family in PEI, that can be quite a strong motivator for travel. And when I think of active families, if grandparents happen to be on Prince Edward Island, then that would be a strong motivator, for the family to visit those folks and turn that into a leisure trip. Okay, for key winter tourism activities. So I mentioned outdoor product. So we're seeing parks, hiking and backpacking, cross-country skiing and snowshoeing popping up, ice skating as well. And here we're seeing in the bottom right corner, exhibition, carnivals, fairs, and markets. So this group definitely would have it would be a strong feature for some of our marquee events that are family oriented, such as things like Jack Frost. This would absolutely be that target market for those type of family friendly, winter related, or even just occurring in the winter that are suitable for the family. And we're seeing auditoriums, arenas, and stadiums, of course, things like hockey games or concerts and events that are family suitable are going to pop up there as well. As far as accommodations go, hotel, this is the strongest group in terms of the four for hotel at just shy of 58% in terms of preference. Of course, with the family hotels, you know, they kind of are sort of that special part of a trip for kids. Sometimes, you know, there's you get pools and things like that when you have the kids on vacation. Package tours, again, the second group in a row where that's shown up strong. That caveat remains that you know, that does include things like all-inclusive vacations and, you know, maybe a trip to Disneyland or something like that. But that is something that stands out. Also seeing vacation rentals, so those kind of standalone vacation rentals at indexing just over our average at 104 there. You know, when you're traveling with the family, those extra bedrooms and space, you know, could be attractive as well. So a mix of accommodation preferences. Okay, restaurant types. So we see that you know, fast casual stands out. You know, it's above average across our frequency types. That makes sense for, you know, a busy family always on the go. Fast casual would suit there. I think that when we're looking at the less frequent columns towards the right and thinking about how this group may choose to spend their dining experience while on a leisure trip, we're likely going to see that casual family restaurant, potentially the pub restaurants where there's a menu that's going to be suitable for everybody, and, you know, a licensed spot where the parents may want to enjoy a beverage, you know, while in the leisure time. So I expect to see, you know, casual family dining, pub restaurants, likely not with the kids going to be going to the higher end culinary experiences. Okay, so third group, urban empty nesters. So the name suggests a bit there. So these are mostly retired singles and couples that tend to live in urban settings. Those, you know, as the name suggests, they're empty nesters, but those that do have children still living at home and defined through our demographics and census data, those children, if you will, would likely be in the older range, even in the upper bucket of 19 to 25. So not those that still have children at home, not necessarily going to be part of the travel party. These folks tend to have stronger ties to PEI in terms of family and friends, and that can be a strong motivator for travel. And this group, compared to the others, are going to be likely less drawn by outdoor activities. Not to say that won't make part of the itinerary, but their kind of primary feature in terms of a trip to Prince Edward Island is going to be driven by culinary and entertainment. And these are folks that are going to be interested in some more substantial culinary experiences potentially. They have a similar market size to the last group, just shy of 9%, 160, almost 167,000 in the Maritimes. Their geographic distribution, much like the last, are more centralized in fewer locations, hence, you know, getting some large indexes standing out across the board. Halifax, again, 38% of this group is located in Halifax. They're an urban group, as I mentioned, so not surprising to see the main city centers showing up in terms of census subdivisions along the left. So 38% in Halifax, there's 8.5% in Cape Breton. That is all one census subdivision. So where, you know, you see things like Sydney, etc. St. John, Fredericton. So as we scroll down the list, we're seeing some urban settings, but again, a large volume located in Halifax and Dartmouth. As far as past travel to PEI, as I mentioned, with all groups, they're strong repeat visitors. We're seeing on the right side a few numbers stand out. So they tend to take longer stays when visiting the province. They're quite highly indexed there at 131, so 5 nights on average. Given the retirement and the age, they have a less of a time budget in terms of more freedom and time to lengthen out their trips. And as I mentioned, they're strong ties to PEI. Over at 56% of them have friends and family in the province. So that's part of the motivation to travel. As far as key winter tourism activities go, again, these folks are going to be a little less drawn by outdoor events, or outdoor activities, although we see some popping up here. They're going to be into entertainment, particularly concerts and theater. These index quite high for those, and we don't see culinary isn't kind of part of this particular section of the report, but we do see bars and restaurants. Number 2 there, almost 37% indicate a preference and a participation in that. So that's, ties into the culinary. As far as accommodation preference, they have a fairly balanced mix across accommodation types. Bed and breakfast is showing up on this group and a little over-indexed there. Worth mentioning that we have seen, certainly in our indicators, a bit of a slower recovery for accommodation types that are owner-occupied or shared dwelling, which makes sense in terms of the increased demand for social distancing and those kind of things in light of the pandemic. So while B&B is showing up there, it may not be the case. Something worth mentioning with all groups, but we've certainly seen it in our research and have talked about, Keith certainly talked about this during the TIPI AGM, is that, there is certainly an increased consideration and demand for those who are traveling, to have safety and cleanliness top of mind, particularly in the accommodation. And so for our various accommodation types, I expect this group above all to be really looking for those accommodation choices that can provide them some peace of mind in terms of good standards of cleanliness, etc. So maybe a bit of a focus for the accommodation operators. We see lots of red across the restaurant type. These are folk that do seem to eat out quite a bit in terms of relationship to the average Maritimer. I've highlighted the formal dine-in restaurants as a higher end of the types, and we see above average across the board there. I expect these groups are going to be looking to certainly less price conscious and looking for a more of a marquee culinary experience as part of their trip and as part of a feature pull in terms of visiting the island. Okay, so on to the last group, young and social. So this is the fourth group, and this is our younger group of travelers. So we are still talking about adults here, but generally younger singles and couples. If there are those in this group that are in the family life cycle, their children are probably quite young, but a lot of them are not yet to the family stage. We'll tend to see a different party composition in terms of higher likelihood that they'll be traveling with friends. So this type of travel party that is multiple adult individuals that are not necessarily couples or in part of that family makeup. The young and social are a trendy bunch that have indulgent lifestyles. So they are very social. They have very social lifestyles and certainly participate in nightlife. And they balance that with fairly healthy lifestyle choices in terms of, fitness memberships, healthy eating, interest in organic eating. They're certainly environmentally and socially conscious. And they have a fairly low representation in the Maritimes in terms of their population size, but they are high yield visitors that our past data have shown us. So they have strong visitor spend, and they are very indulgent. They'll take in a lot of activities on a trip to Prince Edward Island. There are only 3% of the Maritimes, and they tend to be found in urban areas. A lot of towns that have colleges or universities are showing up on that list. They're not necessarily university students. Those that have entered the workforce may have found opportunities in the same place they've studied. And generally speaking, their job types have taken them to urban areas. And so, yeah, not surprising to see something like Wolfville, Nova Scotia be highly, highly indexed. Fredericton as well has a lot of younger people that fit this segment. But not unlike the last two groups, we're seeing here a whopping 62% of our young and social are found in Halifax. So if a targeting effort was going to be made, Halifax would be a strong market, certainly at 62% of these groups found there. Okay, they're lower in terms of repeat visitation to PEI at 86%. All of our groups are strong, and when you talk about Maritimers to have been repeat visitors to PEI is not that surprising given the proximity. This group being younger could explain that repeat visitation being a little lower, or it could be part of their travel tendencies. But they do have a strong average length of stay, just behind our last group, 4.6 nights on average. And as I mentioned, they're a higher yield, spending over $900 per party on their trips to PEI. So, their household income is lower. That being said, some of them are singles in a household, and they tend to like to spend, particularly when on a leisure trip. So, a good high yield visitor. And as we can see on this next table, very indulgent when it comes to activities. They over-index almost completely across the board here. Their outdoor activities are going to be important for this group and will be a pull. They're among the other, compared to the other groups, are probably more likely to do some more vigorous activity. So hikes that are longer, a little more intense, perhaps, when it comes to skiing or cross-country skiing, going out for the full day and taking that in. Photography is showing up here. This group, as you will see as you discover their two-page personification, are strong users of social media. So documenting their leisure trip to Prince Edward Island could be front of mind. They'll like to take in events, and generally speaking, they kind of want to be in social and buzzing environments. We see bars and restaurant bars, not surprisingly, indexing high. As I mentioned, that this group is socially active and engages in the nightlife. And in terms of being social and interacting in social environments, that of course would be when it is safe to do so, in terms of measures that are around in terms of public health at the moment. And so, as far as accommodation preferences, there's a few standouts here. I'd like to kind of point your attention towards the vacation rentals and cottages. This group tends to spring for those standalone units. When they're traveling with friends, you got multiple bedrooms. So an opportunity potentially for those standalone vacation rentals or winterized cottages in PEI. We're seeing bed and breakfast index high again for this group. As I mentioned earlier, that may not be as much the case in this COVID scenario if it's multiple tenants or owner occupied or shared dwellings, I should say. But generally a pretty strong preference across the board with fairly average hotel use, which is still promising. And as far as restaurant types, a whole lot of red we're seeing on this table. This is a group, again, that loves to indulge and likes to eat out. Fast casual restaurants index extremely high across all three frequency types. That's a segment of the food and beverage market that has been trending with younger people, just general restaurant trends. But one thing to note about this group is they're not going to be price conscious or as price sensitive when it comes to choosing dining experiences while on a leisure trip. And so I think what we could keep in mind is they're likely to go to some more social atmospheres. I wouldn't be surprised to see these folks choosing areas like a pub or a brewery even for their dining experience, but not going to be price sensitive towards more formal types of dining. So if we look at all four groups to do a quick comparison and contrasting before I finish up here. So our old-fashioned fun. So again, they're going to be interested in outdoor product. They're that more traditional folk. They're the ones that have shown up well for things like cross-country skiing, snowshoeing, as well as snowmobiling, which could provide some opportunity. It's definitely seasonally appropriate activities. And again, they're all about comfort and familiarity, and so they'll exhibit that in their accommodation and dining choices. So kind of a mix of products to target that group. Our active families, of course, are the family unit. They are doing the family forward activities. They're going to have a busy itinerary. Their activities are going to be relevant for younger families and children. And again, marquee winter events that target the family. That's where this group's going to stand out. Our urban empty nesters, not that they'll ignore outdoor product, but the culinary and entertainment are going to be the primary feature. And we can expect potentially some longer stays from this group, given that their time budget is less constrained than others if they are in their retirement phase. One thing I didn't mention earlier too is that our urban empty nesters they certainly, among that group and that demographic, could have some representation for what we would call snowbirds, or people who may travel south typically in the winters, who may or may not be able to do that this year. It's unlikely in a lot of cases, so also maybe an opportunity within that group. And our young and social, again, this is our young singles and couples, likely traveling with friends, preference for standalone accommodations, kind of want to be in social settings in terms of entertainment and food and beverage. And their outdoor activities are going to be more vigorous potentially and quite active. So they may look to take in a range of things in terms of fun in the snow. So I guess that's the end of my presentation. I expect there maybe has been some questions come up. Keith's been across the room from me here, taking those in. I do want to quickly mention that this segmentation exercise, it's been a rewarding experience, and it hasn't been a solo effort. I want to thank in particular Keith Hansen has done a lot in terms of offering input and help making these segments. Dongku Young provided an incredible amount of data, and there's quite a bit of work goes into cleaning that data before it can be used properly. So I want to give a thanks to Dongku Young as well, and some of our marketing team that helped put some eyes on this and make this happen. So yeah, so that's my bit. Any questions that would be worth addressing for everybody, Keith? Or if there's anybody has any comments or questions now that we've kind of gotten to the end, I'll give a minute to allow you to submit those, and typing those into the chat would probably be the best way. I'm going to have a look at it myself.
Got a few questions coming in here now, Bradford. Let's see here. One point just to make, I got along the presentation, is to keep in mind, while the indexes are important, percentage of the groups and especially when you're talking about the census information, really consider those percents in the census subdivision as well. It's one thing if it's 1% of visitors are in Lunenburg and they index high, but if 40% are in Halifax and aren't indexing quite as well, you may still want to consider that location given the high percentage that live there. So just to say, look at both; they're both important. And check the chat here for other questions. Are the postal code based on updated annually or within a certain 2 to 4 year range? Thanks, Lindsay. Lindsay's asking about if the postal codes are based on data updated annually or if it's within a certain 2 to 4 year range. Environics does update their PRISM profiles on the postal codes based on the postal codes in that 2 to 4 year range. So there was just recently an update though. So I believe just prior, maybe around last January, there was a full revamp of these 67 PRISM profiles. They're all brand new. They're new, but I don't anticipate the postal codes would be updated again for another few years. We got one more here. Interest in volunteer contribution while on leisure travel. The comments you could offer on interest. Oh, that's an interesting take. Kim Doyle's asking about if there's any further comments we could offer on visitors' interest in volunteer contributions while on leisure travel.
One thing that's a good observation. So there is a section on the 2-pagers that talks about general activities, not so much tourism-related activities. And Kim had noticed that there's a strong volunteering in the community and doing volunteer work shows up on all those. So we thought it'd be interesting to include those kind of general hobbies and activities. As far as volunteering while on leisure travel, it's hard to say how that could be necessarily worked into a strategy in terms of a draw to PEI, especially given kind of all of the concerns and distancing and whatnot around COVID. So I think we sort of mostly included that section. It was part of the automated report that we thought might be of interest, just to kind of help think about what type of people are and try to get a sense of relating to these type of maritimers. That kind of paints a better picture in our heads. So hopefully that addresses it. There's another question as well about how the target markets were selected. So is it based on our current product being a better match than others, or are they based on the best markets for winter tourism? When we used our data to determine who our target visitors would be, it wasn't so much as a comparison to other jurisdictions, but a reflection of the past travel patterns that we've seen for visitors coming to PEI. So we really looked first at, well, which prison profiles tend to travel to PEI for leisure, as we've seen through our exit surveys, and of those visitors, which ones tend to visit in winter. We didn't solely pick the ones that traveled in winter, but that helped to encourage, okay, these are our visitors that tend to move during the off season, and visitors that had a high frequency of travel, so they're familiar and have been to PEI and choose PEI as a destination more often than others and have strong travel in the market. And I think, you know, when we're talking about who are our prospective visitors and our target visitors are going to be in the interim, so in this winter, while, you know, COVID is still a reality, I think having that familiarity and a place that I know and a sense of safety becomes important. So it's not necessarily a comparison of our products against other off-island markets. And as far as updating this, I mean, in the future, if and when we have the capacity to do segmentation, you know, as things change in terms of COVID recovery or changing trends in the marketplace, then allows us to sort of adjust for that and perhaps resegment when the time comes. And if we were to, you know, really take a look at Ontario and Quebec for a longer term, you know, as I mentioned earlier, we can quickly locate these segments that we've done for this winter in those areas. But as we look forward to doing a more general 2021 full season traveler, if we want to take a greater look at Ontario and Quebec, which would be a reasonable thing to do, then we would probably benchmark that larger area, so that we're talking about, here's how this segment behaves or has traits compared to the population of all 5 or 6 of those provinces, as opposed to just the Maritimes. Yeah, go ahead.
Question coming in from Kim Doyle. Attendance to large venues come out across the profiles using data source from pre-COVID. When do you anticipate this data source being updated for post-COVID? And I'll just comment on it quickly, Bradford, and if you want to jump in, you go ahead. I would say for this, so depending on the databases, so several of their databases would be updated ongoing. Several would be annually, but I think the point I would like to make on this question is goes back to what Bradford was saying. This is one tool of a suite of tools, and that's a good. COVID is certainly a very drastic effect on the traveler, and I would encourage you to use the other resources, research sources available to you to help inform around those things, around specifically, you know, indoor event venues and things like that, and cleaning protocols and all of that stuff is kind of covered off in some of the research that we've done to date, and it will also definitely be highlighted within the Destination Canada research that's going to come through this winter period, as well as our own Atlantic Canada study that we're working on currently now. Will have results that help inform along that. So very good point. They are updated periodically. I would suggest that for something like the attendance or something like COVID related behaviors, you should look to some specific studies to help inform you in along with the profiles.
Yeah, and when groups tend to show those sort of large venue type venues that you mentioned, you know, given that we can't gather in large areas, when we have substitute type events, such as theaters operating on a reduced capacity, folks that might be interested in going to large concerts, for example, are, may have a willingness to go to some of their smaller events, given that it's the best we can get in this time. Question from Bill, let's see, is there a way to determine if any of these target markets have in fact traveled to PEI in the winter in the past, or if they'd be interested in coming to PEI if we had product available? So yes, for the first half of your question, these groups, part of the selection process was a previous travel in the winter. So these groups performed well, not just in past visitation and repeat visitation, but in fact travel in the winter period. So that was a big part of how we built these. So that's something that would be different if we were making segments for the summer season. And as far as will they have interest in coming to PEI if we had a product available, the best we have is past travel behavior. And I think, as an industry, if we look at the product that we have in PEI and where our strengths are and how we can, combine these products to offer an itinerary or a mix, if you will help, kind of guide our target target segments, I should say, in choosing PEI as a destination for a winter getaway. Okay, so just one more. They did follow up from Bill's question. Did they actually travel winter? You have a measurable that they were traveled. In fact, they would have been participated in the exit survey based on physically being here in that season. So it's not just a question of, do you like to travel in the winter? It was actual evidence of them being here, which is handy that we have that information. So it certainly makes that be a valuable source when we're honing into a season specific segmentation. And still have a few minutes if questions come in, but at the moment that covers what we have in the chat. Appreciate the feedback and the participation and just generally being on the call today. And I think I'll hand it back over to Corinne.
Thank you, Bradford. I think having access, first of all, to the information, but also to the two of you to help disseminate it and make it a little more legible, I guess, to those of us who don't deal with this type of information every day is a huge asset, I think, to our industry. And thank you to everybody who joined today. We hope to be doing many more of these types of webinars and workshops moving forward. And please, if there were questions that come up from maybe today's webinar that you didn't think of until after we're done, send them in. We are happy to communicate with both Bradford and Keith and the team over at Tourism. I think it's incredibly important that we continue to do that. So don't be strangers, stay in touch. And we have a great team over there that is willing to answer any questions we send their way.
Thanks, Corinne.
I think maybe with that, we'll wrap up for today. And again, send in any questions you may have and we'll be in touch soon. Thanks.